Hey y'all, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to check out another one of my videos. Today, I am so excited to finally be sharing this video with you guys, but I finally got my Glaminatrix Cosmetics You Beauty Palette in the mail. And I know at the time of me getting this, I feel like most everyone has done their videos, they've done their reviews, they've done the look, so it's like, what else can I add to it? But I did want to do something with this, because it was very expensive. This is an Australia brand and the conversion rate plus the shipping rate was painful. So I wanted to use it in at least one video dedicated to this palette. And also I'm just super excited about the color story because like, look at this. It is so very beautiful. It's got a gorgeous array, gorgeous mix of warm tones and cool tones, and there's just a grunginess to this. Also there's some like multi-chromes and duochromes in here. I'm not exactly sure which ones are which, but I know they're in here. Don't come to me for multi-chrome advice. Go to Amy Loves Makeup and Bad to the Brow. But anyway, I'm just excited to finally have this palette in my hand. And I figured since there's so many videos already out sharing with you guys first impressions, looks, and reviews, I'd switch it up a little bit and share with you guys palettes that I found in my collection and that were very similar to this, so you can see if you own those or if you're able to get those a little bit easier than this palette, maybe you don't need to grab this palette or you don't need to stress about getting it very, very soon, that sort of thing. I never mean for these kind of comparison slash dupe videos to be like, oh, don't support this brand, you don't need this palette. That's not my vibe over on my channel. I feel like everyone can decide what they need, but I do know that these type of videos can be helpful to people who either can't spend the money on the palette, can't get this palette available to them in their country, or just don't want to spend, the money to buy that palette. Like I said, maybe it's just outside of your budget. That way you can either shop your own makeup and see if any of these palettes I'm going to share with you already own, or you can, all of these palettes that I'm sharing with you guys are cheaper than this palette, so you can save some money maybe and go another route. So that's kind of my purpose. I'm also going to be sharing with you guys two different looks created with this palette. The first look that I'm going to share with you guys is actually the one I'm wearing today, and it's actually done with one of the palettes that I found to be the closest dupe in my collection. So if you can guess which eye do you think I have the You Beauty palette on, and which eye do you think I have the contender, if you want to see which other palette I put on my eyes, stay tuned. We're going to get into that in a minute. But I'm also going to put in one more bonus tutorial at the very end. It's just going to have music over it, very relaxing, but one more just using this palette and getting very creative. So that's everything that's going to be in this video. I know this is like the longest intro ever, but let's go ahead and just jump right into it. And I first want to start showing you guys all the comparison palettes that I found that are very, very comparable to the Glaminatrix You Beauty palette. Okay, so let's go ahead and just take a nice and up close look at the Glaminatrix You Beauty palette. I'll go ahead and stick an overlay so you guys can really see this palette, see the colors, and also watch me swatch this on my arm. I will say swatching this on my arm, overall, I was very pleased with how everything swatched. I do feel like She'll Be Right, Buggy Smuggers, and Struth were a little bit tricky. Those are all mattes. They were a little bit, not tricky, but they were a little lackluster in the way that they swatched. But everything else was very pretty. There is definitely, with all of the shimmers, a sheerness that I honestly wasn't really expecting. Just had a little sheerness to it, and maybe that's something to help with the duochrome or multi-chrome aspect of it, but it was something that I definitely noticed when swatching. I was like, okay, these are a little bit thinner. They can maybe use, a base or something underneath to get them to pop more, just some type of tacky base. But overall, like swatching it, I was very pleased. I never take too much stock in swatches. I just kind of like, oh, okay, that is a little drier. Oh, okay, that doesn't look the best. But I do definitely feel I'm one of those people that just think that swatches really don't tell the whole story. They're just fun to see it swatched out, and they're just fun to see how it looks on your skin tone and whatnot. But anyway, so that is the You Beauty palette by Glaminatrix. So let's get into all the comparison palettes, or comparable palettes, I guess I should say, that I found that were already in my makeup collection. And I actually found a total of 6 palettes, which I was really surprised to find that many, because I didn't think, I felt like this color show was very unique. Now, all of the 6 palettes aren't like home runs where they dupe everything, but a large majority of the palette that I found to be dupe of the You Beauty palette, I felt like a majority of the shadows could be deemed close enough to be similar, to the point where if you own the palette, you could probably get very similar looks as to those people who own the You Beauty palette, that sort of thing. So hopefully that makes sense. But let's go ahead and dive into it. Let me go ahead and just start with the palette that I decided to do on my eyes today against the You Beauty palette, and that is the Nomad Fire and Ice palette. Now I have a little bit of a confession to make, because I asked on Instagram, I put this palette next to the You Beauty with one other palette, which we'll talk about next, but I put them all together and was like, which one do you think is the closest? Which one do you guys want to see me do in a video? And actually the other palette was winning by, not a lot, but by several votes. It was winning over the Nomad palette, and I was just like, really? So actually before this video, I went ahead and did the arm swatches, and I just could find so many more similarities between the Nomad palette to the You Beauty palette than the other palette that I was just like, you know what, I'm going to do an executive order and I'm going to go ahead and just use the Nomad, even though more people did want me to use the other palette. I just saw so many similarities between the Nomad Fire and Ice and the You Beauty palette. I feel like the only shadows that I couldn't find anything for, and you're going to see in the overlay, I'm not going to, you know, swatch the whole palette out just side by side. If you want to see that, let me know and I can put that on my Instagram. But for the sake of this video, I only swatched the shadows that I felt like were dupes for the ones in the You Beauty palette. So with the Nomad Fire and Ice, I definitely don't feel like there's any golds to match with the ones in the You Beauty palette. But besides that, honestly, it came pretty darn close in my opinion. So that's the biggest reason why I wanted to go ahead and use the Fire and Ice palette. But yeah, the Fire and Ice palette is the one I'm going to use in the comparison tutorial. The next palette, now this is the one that you guys asked, majority of people were voting for, but it is the Juvia's Place Valhalla palette. And honestly, I was really surprised. Like when I opened it, I was like, okay, I'm seeing those shadows. But like there was only just so many that stood out. I felt like it was very comparable. And when I went ahead and swatched it, as you guys are going to see, yes, there are a lot of good comparisons and like a lot of very good close ones to what I see in the You Beauty palette. However, there are a lot of empty spaces, and when I was thinking of the looks that I could do, like what look I would create with the Valhalla palette and the You Beauty palette, I felt a little limited because there weren't enough in the Juvia's Place palette for me to be able to feel very creative, I guess you could say. So again, that's another reason I went ahead and chose the Nomad, but still, they are pretty darn comparable. So if you do have the Valhalla and maybe all the shadows that are similar enough to be dupes are the ones that were interesting you the most in the You Beauty palette, maybe that'll be a good reason for you to not need to go run out and get the You Beauty palette anytime soon, or you can just wait a bit and whatnot, but definitely a palette in my collection that I thought was pretty darn close. Next up is the Musée Beauty Van Gogh palette. Were any of you guys expecting this? Here's what it looks like. Now again, I mean, it's nothing exact. There definitely isn't that bright, beautiful blue in there, and there definitely isn't those, you know, multi-chromes and whatnot. These are just normal shimmers. However, when you really look at the color story, it has the mustards, it has those dark blues, the rich blues, it has the, you know, yellow and the more orangey tones that the You Beauty palette has. So it has some colors. Again, I'm going to be swatching them side by side. It definitely isn't an exact dupe or anything, but it definitely has the vibe enough and close enough, and there were enough shadows in the Musée Beauty palette that I felt like was close to the You Beauty that I went ahead and decided to swatch them out. So definitely something to consider if you do already own the Musée Beauty palette. Next up, the Monet Jasper from N Cosmetics. This one, again, really surprised me because when I opened it and I was looking over, I was like, okay, there's a dark blue. I see that. There's even the bright blue, which I was like, oh, okay, that's nice. That's definitely similar. There's the yellow that I could see in the other palette, and then there's the darker red. A little bit different there, but still, there was the red. So there was a lot in this palette. Again, it's a smaller palette than the You Beauty, but there was a good number of the shadows in the Monet Jasper that I thought were similar enough to the You Beauty palette that I wanted to go ahead and swatch them out side by side so you guys can see and determine, because if you already have the Monet Jasper, maybe you were looking at this palette for those blues and more reddish tones and that, you know, mustardy yellow, maybe you don't need it, or you can just do a couple looks now. If you already have the Monet Jasper and you don't have the You Beauty yet, you can get some looks, and maybe you're inspired by all these looks people are doing with the You Beauty. You can go ahead and pick up your Monet Jasper and get some similar looks, but that was definitely another palette that I thought was very, very close. And next up is the Made by Mitchell Feet on the Ground palette. This behemoth of a palette, but here is what it looks like. Here they are compared to each other, and I definitely feel like there's a lot in the Made by Mitchell, so it's just a little bit overwhelming to look at. There definitely isn't any blues in this palette. However, when you look past the blues, I kind of felt like I could see the tones in there with the golds and the greens and the more mauvey tones even. This is gonna be the weakest one, I definitely feel like, but this was such a large palette and there was enough that I was going like, okay, I can kind of see that, so I figured I would swatch it, but I figured I would throw it in there since I'm doing all these swatches anyway. What was one more palette? So this is another one I just wanted to mention very briefly. If you already have this palette, maybe you can get a couple looks. Okay, and last up is the Kaleidos and Angelica Nyquist Club Nebula palette. This was actually the first one that I was recommended when I asked, like, what palettes do you think of when you see the You Beauty palette? They were like, oh my goodness, you gotta do it against the Club Nebula. And I honestly wouldn't have thought about it if I just like opened these and like looked at it briefly, but the more I stared at it, I was like, okay, I'm seeing it there. And I almost used this palette to do the comparison originally, since I felt like, okay, they're pretty close and you can't get the Club Nebula. But I ended up deciding to just go ahead and do one that you can still purchase. I don't know, it was just an executive decision I made again to go ahead and not do a look with the Club Nebula. I will be doing a look with this soon at some point on my channel. I just haven't had a chance to. But there are similar enough shades that I felt like I could swatch them out side by side and show you guys so you guys could see. There are like all the shades that are close, I feel like are just a little bit different though, if that makes any sense. You guys can see from the swatches, like, yeah, they're the same blues, but they're like different hues and that sort of thing. So definitely something to know. But overall, like if you're just going by amount of color and just like shade range, like yeah, that's a dark blue, the Kaleidos has a dark blue, that sort of thing, they are very similar. So definitely worth noting if you already have the Club Nebula, maybe take a harder look at it, a closer look at it. I do also know that the Club Nebula has special shadows of like multi-chromes, duochromes. I'm honestly not sure if they're multi-chromes, but I do think they're duochromes in here, so that makes it a little bit similar formula-wise to the You Beauty palette that does have those multi-chromes and duochromes in it. So yeah, definitely another palette that I wanted to go ahead and compare to the You Beauty palette. Okay, so those are all the palettes that I found in my collection that were similar enough. Let's go ahead and jump into the tutorial portion of this. This is gonna be like the long form tutorial where I'm doing it on camera with you guys and chatting as I go. So let's go ahead and jump into that, and then we will meet back here to talk a little bit more before jumping into the final tutorial. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this. I'm gonna be putting the You Beauty palette on my left side and then the Nomad Cosmetics Fire and Ice palette on my right. I'm gonna take that yellow there. What is this even called? Struth? This shade right here. I remember why I just point to try to pronounce names because I always feel bad when I butcher it. But anyway, I'm going to take that, and this is what I think is the most different out of the palette, which is one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do this look, using shades that weren't the closest, because I feel like a lot of the shades between the two palettes, it's very obvious, as you guys saw from the swatches. It's like, oh yeah, those are almost spot on. If you did a look, you really wouldn't tell the difference. Like the blues are where I feel like it's strongest. So I wanted to use the other ones that weren't so strong so you guys can see exactly how different it is. That way, hopefully it's more helpful for you to determine if you need the Glaminatrix or if you prefer, the Fire and Ice side, or you have the Fire and Ice side, that sort of thing. So let me stop talking. Let's get on and just apply this with a fluffy brush into my crease. There we go. I feel like that's a little bit better. So I'm just going to apply this haphazardly into my crease, just kind of to set my brow bone area and to start a color. It's just gonna be my first base color to kind of tint and start the process. And I'm curious to see how this palette layers. There we go. That was pretty darn easy. Forgot to say, but I primed with my Lorac Behind the Scenes eyeshadow primer, and then on top of that, once that set in for like 2 seconds, I really didn't wait that long, but then I went on top with the Makeup Revolution Conceal and Define Concealer and just blended that in, and I didn't set it. This is my setting for that concealer. But anyway, so now that that's set down, I'm actually just gonna clean this because I feel like this is just such a perfect little brush. I've been really loving it. It's the Profusion ES3, and then now that it's clean, now I'm gonna jump into the equivalent in the Nomad palette, which is this one right here, and this is more of an orange. So like I said, this is going to be the most different. This shade and the red in the Nomad palette are going to be the most different from the Glaminatrix. I got that really quickly. The color is more intense, so I think that's another reason why I got that kind of applied on my eyes and blended out a little bit quicker than the other side. But yeah, there we go. There is the difference right off the bat. And I'm gonna set this down, and we're gonna move on to my inner crease to kind of deepen it up. I'm gonna get a really kind of fluffy brush going into this one from the You Beauty palette, and I'm going to pack that right in here. Okay, so there we have that kind of set down. There is that. I think that blended out really nice. I'm just gonna go on a touch more of that, or that orange, that yellow, just to blend it out a little bit more. So cleaning off that same brush, let's go ahead and go into the comparison shade, and that's this one in the Nomad palette. Okay, that's blending nicely, and it's actually not that bad. Like, yeah, it's different. It definitely doesn't have the red, but it's not that far off, honestly. Another reason, I don't think I'll say this in the beginning, so I'm gonna go ahead and say it here, but another reason I really wanted to do this side-by-side comparison to the Nomad is because I feel like quality-wise, their mattes feel so similar. Like they just have that same softness, that same buttery feel to it, that same pigmentation when you swatch them. I'm gonna take that same brush and just touch into just touch into this shade right here, just to add depth to try to match this side. I think that's something I often don't think about when I'm looking for dupe palettes, is like, if you have this palette and you're trying to dupe out a palette you don't wanna buy, you can mix shades a little bit and whatnot. It doesn't have to be exact, within a shadow. Like I can't add and mix shades together. So I'm just trying to be very careful because I don't want this shade to overpower it at all. But yeah, just like that. So I'm going to touch a little bit more. Do I need to bring it in? Okay, and then I'm going to clean that off because I don't want any more brown. I'm gonna go back in with the orange and just blend back over that. I don't see any fallout on either side, but it's kind of habit to pause and blend any away. I don't know if I should use the blue on the outer corner or the brown. I feel like the brown is like obviously the easiest one to go with, but then I'm like, whoa, well, what would the blue look like? Like I don't want to spend 10 years blending, which I feel like I might if I sit there and put blue on the outer corner. Okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna start with the blue. We'll see if I regret this. I am gonna go in with a really tiny little packer brush like this E27, and I'm going to start it and keep it low, and then as I blend, if I need to add some of the brown right where the two meet, I will do that just to make sure everything blends fairly nicely. But I think I'm gonna want this blue. It's very pigmented. And they're also, I didn't even mention, but the You Beauty palette is pretty powdery when you dip into the mattes. Not all of the mattes, I will say. I used this shadow this morning and it didn't really have any kick up, but most of them, I would say, have a good decent amount of kick up. But anyway, I'm gonna pack this on my outer corner carefully. Okay, I'm gonna go in, clean this off, and I'm gonna go in with just a touch of that brown right where the two meet. Just kind of help it. I just feel like it'll help a little bit kind of blur. I literally just touched into that brown. It's so pigmented. I'm going back into that red, and I'm just going right on top to make sure that the brown doesn't leave any lines. And then I'll go back in with the blue and continue diffusing and making sure the lines are as soft as I can make them. I'm gonna take a break here. I think it's pretty good. Maybe a little liney, but honestly, like a little liney as in, you know, there's a little bit of a harsh line where some of the colors, there we go, that actually helped a lot. Where some of the colors stop and whatnot, but honestly, I do think that is because of my color choices. It's just, I'm not that talented when it comes to blending. Let me go ahead and clean off that brush, and I'm gonna go ahead and do that to the other side. And for this side, I'm using this blue from the palette, and if I need any brown, it's going to be this brown. Why'd I do that? I'm so clumsy. Darn it, and then I touched it with a dirty finger. I am a mess. Okay, and then I'm gonna take just a touch of that brown. We've already put some of the brown in there, so it's not that much more that I'm adding in, but I'm just going to put it right in there, and then right kind of on top of that brown to help. And then I'll take, again, that previous brush that I used for the red in the Glaminatrix palette. I'm going to put a good bit of the red from the Nomad palette and put it right on top. Okay, this is looking good. I try to be careful when I'm doing a lot of packing and blending of colors together because I don't want to ever like cause palettes to patch because I'm just playing around with it too much. So I feel like these are blended enough. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on into my lid, and I'm going to use a glitter primer. I did use this shade right here today, and I didn't use a glitter primer, and it didn't fall on my face, but it was starting to transfer up into my, let me move this. I did get some fallout here. Not on that side, but I was getting transfer up into my crease. Okay, and then now going to get a nice flat brush. This is e.l.f.'s concealer brush. I love little concealer brushes for applying shimmer. Now I want to put on the lid shade, and I am going to use this blue because there is a very nice vibrant blue in the Nomad palette, and if it's not vibrant enough, I can also top it a little bit with this icy blue, but this blue has just been staring at me so much. I will say, like, picking it up, it looks very chunky and transparent, and that's definitely something I noticed with this shade right here. It was very chunky and hard to pick up on a brush. It eventually did, like, I just had to kind of go back and forth a ton to get it to transfer, but it worked best with my finger. When I used my finger, it went on really nicely and didn't take as long. So yeah, this is looking pretty transparent. It's very soft too, like just trying to very gently rub my brush over it. I'm making like a little crater in the shadow. You guys know I like my shimmers to be nice and intense, and I don't like to use my fingers. I just find that when I use my fingers, I don't know if it's just because I don't clean it off properly afterwards, but like I'll just get shimmer all over my face. You know what, we'll use my finger. This is taking, I mean, it's not terrible. This application isn't terrible. It's just not as intense as what I see in the pan, and that's kind of what I want on my eyes. So I'm just going to take, oh, look at that. Like, look at the difference. I just feel like there's a big difference there. It's actually looking more green. I don't know if it's because of the shadows I'm using around it or if it's like a duochrome, so it's this angle. I know there are some in the palette, I just can't remember which ones, but it's looking pretty green on my finger and whatnot. Not so bright blue, like down in the pan it looks bright blue, but here it looks more green. Anyway, so now that I've pressed it down, see, like, oh, that's so pretty. But now I'm just gonna take more on my brush and just use this to get a nice sharp line. I know a lot of people do enjoy it, but I don't like the messy look when it comes to my shimmers on my eye look. I like the half cut crease look, so that's just very like sharp. So that's just kind of my style. Hope this look isn't too like boring or just kind of like typical with this palette. I feel like the more I'm doing it, the more I'm like, I feel like we've seen this look, Katie. Anyway, that's what I'm gonna do for that side. I do feel like I have an issue getting it higher. I feel like if I wanted to get it higher and do a really nice cut crease, I would have had to go beforehand and actually cut it out with concealer, because trying to use this brush to cut it is not opaque enough and I can't pick it up easy enough on my brush for me to be able to get that line. This is all I can do with the brush, and I just feel like I'm not gonna get any better than that, so I'm gonna move on, but definitely something to notice. So let's go ahead and do this side, which I can't forget if I told you, but I'm going into that shadow, and I'm just using the same brush. Okay, so now with that, I almost feel like I need to top it. Oh, I think I'm gonna do that. So this Nomad shadow is like a true blue shadow. However, this one in the You Beauty palette, I think is more of a duochrome or something, because in the pan it looks more blue, but on my eye it's looking very green. So I'm actually going to, I just went into this, so I'm gonna take a little bit of this and I'm going to pat it over just to get a little bit of that green pop, because that shadow is also more of a sheer shadow. So it should work really well to kind of combine the two. Okay, what do you guys think? There's definitely an intensity to the You Beauty palette that the Nomad palette, it comes nowhere near close. However, color-wise, I feel like combining these two was the trick to get it to look very similar to the other side. So now I'm just gonna tap out the outer edges just to make them a little bit closer, and then I'm going to take a little bit of blue underneath with a little bit of the red. Okay, so for this one, I think I'm just gonna stick to this shade right here. It does have more of a gold cast to it, but there is also a cool tone aspect to it, and I just feel like that's gonna be the most similar to the Nomad, because I'm gonna use this one and it is a true like silver. So let me go ahead and do just the Nomad one first. I don't know why, I'm just doing it, but I'm gonna pop it on here. It's nice and blinding, but it's definitely a cool tone, just like icy blue. It's beautiful for the inner corner, definitely tends to be always the one that I go for. Okay, my camera stopped recording, but there is that side. It's nice and very silver and very cool tones. And I'm gonna go into the You Beauty side. I'm gonna pop this on. Okay, so not as much gold as I thought I saw in the reflection. There's a pink to this shift. Look at me, I'm wrong all over the place. I don't know, I just thought when I looked at it from the side, I saw like a gold shift. But nope, this is much more of a pink, which still makes it very different from the Nomad side. However, now that I see that, let me go ahead and wipe this off again, because I do have this shade up here, which is definitely purplish, but it's very transparent, and just it's more of like those toppery shades. So I'm gonna use it as a topper for my inner corner to see if we can get it a little bit more pinky, since the other side is a pink. Okay, no, it's more of a purple. Oh well, I had to dry it just to see if we could get it a little bit closer. I'm gonna go ahead and put on my eyeliner and mascara off camera. I'm gonna put some black on my waterline, and then we can come back to show you guys the final look and chit chat a little bit more about this palette. And yeah, I'll be right back. All right, so here is my final look. I really love how it ended up. I will say something I noticed is that this side, my cut crease comes up a lot higher than this side, and typically with my eye shape, because this eye is more hooded and like just, I don't know, more sunken in and whatnot, and smaller than this side, usually that I have the opposite problem of this side being too small in comparison to this side. So I thought that was a little interesting, because I do think that has something to do with me having just a difficulty of getting a cut crease with that blue shadow that I used in the You Beauty palette, which is an interesting observation I figured I would throw out there. But honestly, for how different I thought that the yellow and the red was between these two palettes, these looks came out pretty darn close. You'll have to let me know what you guys think as you guys see the close-ups and whatnot, but overall, I really like how this look turned out. It was a lot of fun to use these two palettes next to each other, so I'm excited to keep using it, and I will definitely have a more thorough review for you guys in a little bit the next time I do my ranking the last 10 palettes that I tried. I'm going to be having one of those videos go live next week, but that's for my old 10. I'm starting a new 10 currently, and this is going to be in that next video, so I'm sorry if that's a bit confusing for you, but I will definitely be giving you guys a full review and sharing with you guys all the looks that I created with this palette. But for today's video, I at least wanted to give you guys two looks and first impressions. This is definitely my first impressions when it comes to this palette because I have not had enough time to play around with it. But anyway, yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the second tutorial. And as I said, this isn't going to be a voiceover. I'm just going to kind of make it a shorter, kind of sped through version, almost like an Instagram IGTV type of video, and just share with you guys one more look that you can create with the You Beauty palette. But let's go ahead and just jump right into it, and then we'll meet back here to give you guys my final thoughts before wrapping up this video. Okay, you guys, you made it to the end of this video. I feel like these comparison videos and tutorials and first impression videos are very long, but I hope they're as informative as I'm able to make them since they are first impressions and this isn't a thorough review. So definitely, like I said, stay tuned for my thorough review, but first impressions are I'm very pleased. I'm just a little bit skeptical with if it's worth the price because it is such an expensive palette and these shimmers aren't exactly my favorite to work with. Like, they're very pretty, they're very special, but you know, the two that I used today, which is the blue and the pink over here, don't want to pick up with a brush and don't want to like go on very opaquely. They're more of a sheer type of overspray type of shadow, which, you know, it just isn't my personal favorite. I know a lot of people love those kind of topper shadows, but just something to throw out there. That's really my only drawback so far with this palette, but overall, very pleased. I loved how easy the dark, intense colors were to blend out. That's always a plus in my eyes. And yeah, I'm just overall excited to finally have it. But yeah, that's gonna do it for today's video. Thank you. I think I've already said this, but thank you so much for sticking to the end. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you very soon in my next one. Bye, guys.